think I came out too early. It's great to be here with you guys. I'm so excited to share a little bit about my story. I have a lot of content for you. Jeff told me there were a lot of nonprofits in the room. So I hope that some of this would just be useful. A little bit of the playbook, some of the things that we've done over the last 11 years, and really kind of the thinking behind some of that. So I'll start with a little backstory. I was born in Philadelphia. This is mom, this is dad, middle-class family. When I was 4, my parents became Christians. He was a kind of hard-drinking ex-Navy guy. She was a writer for the newspaper. And they moved us to this house in South Jersey to get closer to his new job. And he wanted to spend less time commuting, more time together as a family. What we didn't know when we moved into this house is that it had a carbon monoxide gas leak. Now, this is before they had invented the carbon monoxide detector. So we all start to get a little sick. On New Year's Day, 1980, my mom walks across the bedroom and she collapses unconscious. We take her to the hospital and we find massive amounts of carbon monoxide in her bloodstream. So my dad actually rips out the heater. He finds the crack himself. Being new Christians, they decide not to sue the gas company for gross negligence. They just didn't want to become bitter, and they didn't want to become involved in a lawsuit. I watched my mom, thankfully, not die, but her immune system was never the same. So her immune system was irreparably destroyed from this carbon monoxide. So she goes from this healthy, vibrant mom, wife, writer, to someone who's just allergic to the world. It's the best way I can describe it. Car fumes make her sick now. Ink from books make her sick. Perfume, soap. We prepare a special room for her. We cover the entire room in tinfoil. She begins sleeping on an army cot that was washed 20 times in baking soda, just avoiding exposure to all the normal things that our bodies just fight off every day. So I go into a caregiver role. At 4, I now start doing the cooking and the cleaning. I'm helping take care of mom. And I grow up this really good Christian kid, playing piano on Sundays in church. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't swear, I don't have sex. I'm playing by all the rules, helping to take care of mom. You know where this is going, probably? So then 18 happened, and I went from, this little kid playing piano in church, and I went to my first nightclub in New York City, and I felt like I was home. It's called Club USA. I actually remember going down a slide inside the nightclub. And I learned that, if one was interested in rebelling in style, there was this job in New York City where you could get paid to drink alcohol. It's called a nightclub promoter, right? If you could get the right people inside the right clubs, not only would you drink for free, you could charge them exorbitant amounts for alcohol. People would actually pay $700 for a bottle of champagne that costs $50 or $60. They'd pay $20 for a cocktail. So I begin climbing the social ladder of New York nightlife 3 years before I'm legally allowed to be in the clubs. And I work at 40 venues over the next decade. So this is a picture of my life 10 years later. What I love about, or what's sad about this picture, is that you'll notice I am pretentiously holding out my Rolex watch in this photo, so that some club photographer I've never met notices I own an expensive watch. This is my business partner, Brantley. We were actually getting paid $4,000 a month by Bud to drink Budweiser in public, and another $4,000 a month by Bacardi to be seen drinking Bacardi in public. So we thought we were at the top of our game. I mean, getting paid to be seen drinking in public. It doesn't get any better than this. Okay, well, this is 10 o'clock at night. This is around 3 in the morning after the cocaine and the ecstasy and the MDMA starts. And this is around noon the next day. So what looked great on the inside, or on the outside, I was rotting on the inside. And I'd picked up every vice over 10 years that you would imagine would come with nightlife. 2 packs of Marlboro Reds a day, drinking, gambling, pornography, strip clubs, pretty much every drug short of heroin. So I have this epiphany. I'm 28. My poor parents have been praying for me for 10 years for their prodigal to come home. I mean, mom has ladies at church, wearing, holes in the carpet with their knees, trying to bring me home. My dad even signed me up for Models for Christ email list, thinking maybe a Christian model would bring me back. None of this worked. 28, I'm in Punta del Este, and I'm with the jet set. We rented this big compound. I remember we had servants waiting on us. We had horses. We had magnums of Dom Perignon. We went out the night before. We bought $1,000 of fireworks. My girlfriend at the time was on the cover of Elle magazine. I drove a BMW. I had a grand piano in my New York apartment, and I had a Labrador Retriever. Like, what more could you want? All the things that I had been, that I thought would make me happy. And I realized on this trip that there would never be enough. It's like the game of musical chairs, the music stopped and I didn't have anywhere to sit down. And I looked around and I realized that there were people much richer than I was. I mean, I just realized there'd never be enough girls, there'd never be enough parties, there'd never be enough money or status. And that I had somehow become the most morally and spiritually bankrupt person that I knew. And I'd come so far from the morality of my childhood. So I'm a pretty extreme guy. I start to pray again, and I ask God the question. I say, what would the exact opposite of my life look like? What would the opposite of this hedonistic, selfish life look like? So I come back to New York City, and there's a series of circumstances that happen. But I sell everything I own later that summer, and I begin to apply to the famous humanitarian organizations I'd heard of. I apply to Save the Children, I apply to World Vision and Samaritan's Purse and Oxfam, and I'm ready to do 1 year of humanitarian service. That was my idea, right? The great nightclub promoter is now ready to serve the poor. You can imagine how this went. I'm denied by every single organization. No one will take me even for free. You almost wouldn't believe this, but one organization writes me back and says, Scott, if you're willing to pay us $500 a month, and if you're willing to go live in post-war Liberia, you can volunteer with us. So I'm like, this is great. Here are my credit card details. I was looking for the opposite. I have to pay you to volunteer. Fantastic. So I dust off a journalism degree that I'd gotten at NYU and never used and said, I'll come on your humanitarian mission. I actually have 15,000 people on my club list, on my email list. Back then, email open rates were like 100%. I said, I'll be able to hopefully tell the stories of what great work you're doing and maybe raise some awareness and raise some money. So I go to Liberia. I travel in with 14,000 United Nations peacekeepers. And I join a group that some of you might have heard of called Mercy Ships. Giant hospital ship, 522-foot ocean liner that had been converted into a 42-bed state-of-the-art hospital. And they'd sailed this thing for a quarter of a century up and down the African coast, bringing the best doctors and surgeons in the world to people who can't afford access to medical care. So I was going to document all of the work happening on this big ship. So I meet Dr. Gary Parker, and he really becomes my first mentor, my first guide in this new journey. And I realized that I learned his story. This was a plastic surgeon in California. And he signed up for 3 months, and that was 25 years before I met him. He never left. Got married, raised his kids on the ship. So I realized that I would need an extreme life change to really fully embrace this new story in my life. And I really went all in. I had this night before I walked up the gangway of the ship, and I got fantastically drunk. I smoked 3 packs of Marlboro Reds. I just knew that this had to be the ending. And there was something almost prophetic about like walking up a gangway and sailing away into a new life and leaving all my vices on the shore. So I quit everything in one go. Join the ship, we sail into Liberia, and I start taking pictures of the country. Now, this country had been ruined by Charles Taylor and his 14-year civil war with children, and the entire country was shot up. Bullet holes riddled everything. People were living in bombed-out apartment buildings, hundreds of people living in buildings with no glass, houses that were once beautiful that had been completely decimated by the war. And I realized that we were there to help. And before our ship sailed in, a small advance team would flyer the country. They'd put up these posters everywhere and say, hey, if you've got a giant facial tumor, if you have flesh-eating disease, if you're born with a cleft lip or a cleft palate, if you're burned during the war, sometimes the rebels would pour oil on the children to try and fuse their body parts together for fun. If you've got one of these conditions, turn up and we'll try and help you. Now, I should have known when I learned the government gave us a soccer stadium, a football stadium, that a lot of people were going to come. I knew we had 1,500 available surgery slots to fill. So I get up on screening day. It's my third day in Africa. I put on hospital scrubs. I jump into a Land Rover at 5 in the morning. And as we turn the corner and see the stadium, I see 5,000 people waiting outside to get in the doors. So this is a huge moment for me, realizing we don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough surgery slots. We're going to send 3,000 people home. Later learned many of these people had walked for more than a month from neighboring countries just in the hope of seeing a doctor or getting a doctor for their child. First photo I took, first child who we let in was a little boy named Alfred Sassu. He was 14 years old. He was suffocating to death on his face with a benign tumor. And his mom, who you can see here, pulls out a photo, says through a translator, 4 years ago, my son was completely normal. And then this tumor starts growing and there's nowhere to take him to. So we took him to the witch doctor, and the witch doctors cut him with knives and they put pastes in his tumor. And it just kept growing larger and larger and larger. And now my son's about to die. I learned we were there to help. And a couple days later, I took pictures of these amazing surgeons who could be in Mustique or the Maldives on vacation. Instead, we're using their hands, their skill to help kids like Alfred. A couple weeks later, I got to take him home to his village with a new face, and I got to watch him heal, to watch this life completely restored. So this is what my job was. It was an amazing job. I would wake up in the morning, I'd go down on the ward, I'd photograph and start interviewing the patients scheduled that day. I remember this woman named Martha Lean told me that this tumor had been growing for 8 years, and you can kind of see she has a colorful towel in her hand. She said that if people saw her tumor, they would stone her. They would throw rocks at her face because they thought she was spiritually cursed. So she needed a 40-minute surgery just to remove a very benign mass. So I'm emailing these photos back to my club list. I got a few unsubscribes, I'm not gonna lie. You know, they're like, that Prada party you threw was awesome, but like the tumor party, I'm just not down. Most people, though, said, this is amazing. How do I help? How do I give money? How do I join this ship? How do I use my time? And the first year, I took 50,000 photos. And I was emailing the list every single week. Here's what's happening. Here's what's happening. Here are the people that we're helping. Will you join us? The year turns into 2, so I sign up for a second tour. I go back to Liberia. The second year, I get off the ship, and I'm spending most of my time now in the rural areas. And I see the water that people are drinking. I see dirty water for the first time in my life. And I see that people are drinking from swamps and ponds and rivers all throughout Liberia. I meet this 13-year-old girl named Hawa. And I talk to her, and I realize she's never tasted clean water in her entire life. She has only known this swamp. I learned that 50% of the country is drinking dirty water. So I really didn't have to be that smart to make the link between health and disease and water. And as I'm telling the surgeons what I'm showing, and as I'm showing them these photos, the doctors, the surgeons are saying, water needs an advocate. This is the question behind the question of so much of the sickness. Why don't you go work on this issue? Why don't you see, instead of building another ship where we can do, another couple thousand surgeries, what if you took this issue on, and what if you tried to make it so that 5,000 people didn't need to actually turn up sick outside a stadium? So in that second year, I became really interested in water. I come back to New York City, and my friends are still buying $10 bottles of water in nightclubs and not opening them. Imagine seeing, $40, $50 just sitting there unopened because they're drinking champagne or liquor. So I'm running around telling everybody in Soho, where I came back to, that I want to end the water crisis in my lifetime. I want to see a day on earth where nobody, simply because of where they're born, is drinking bad water. I focus on this problem of 663 million people, a tenth of the world, drinking bad water. So I'll talk just a little bit about the issue and then what we've done to try and make an impact. You put up a statistic. I'm sure many of you have tons of statistics in your work, but people kind of numb out. It's impossible to imagine, 2/3 of a billion people doing anything. So really, over the last 10 years, we have spent so much time trying to tell the stories of the individuals who are trapped in the water crisis. Kids like John Bosco in southern Rwanda, And we tell his story and we talk about this water that, you look at this, you wouldn't let your dog drink this water. You wouldn't let a hamster drink this water. And it's the only water he and his family have ever known, the entire village has ever known. It's a little girl in Honduras drinking what looks more like chocolate milk. It just comes from a river. So I started learning about all the diseases associated with bad water. I'm sure everybody's heard of cholera, E. coli. I had not heard of schistosoma before, which is a fancy word for parasites or worms. Affects 200 million people. And as I traveled around, I would actually see this in action. This was a little girl in Kenya that was drinking from the Molo River up in northern Kenya, and she would drink from this bottle, and then she would vomit on her shirt, just in a cycle. Drink, throw up, drink, throw up. And we watched this in horror. It was with a few people when we took the water away from her and promised to try to find a more sustainable solution to her village. But I took this actual bottle back with me to New York City. Probably should have told them at customs, but it was just in my bag, and nobody asked. And I gave it to a lab at Rockefeller University, and I said, hey, would you analyze this water? Would you put it under a microscope? And this is what they sent me back. They said, you sent us water that is definitely alive. We've never seen anything like this before. We're not experts in all the amoebas and parasites, but no child should be drinking water that looks like this. As I traveled around, I learned that leeches were a huge problem for communities as they were getting their water. Now, I had never thought of a leech before as a problem with drinking water, but community after community, the women would hold out their hands. They'd show us the leeches that they were picking from the water. And they'd say, we can always strain out the big leeches, but sometimes these little leeches will get through the cloth that we filter the water with. And they grow up inside our bodies, and they grow up inside the bodies of our children, and the leech's favorite spot is the back of the throat. So it kind of crawls up and just starts sucking blood there. So we've heard story after story after story of parents giving their kids diesel fuel to kill the leech, to scald the leech. Because if they just try and kill it with a stick, the leech just crawls up again. This is how most of the filtration is done. The women often don't have the money to buy firewood to boil the water, or the awareness and the education just isn't there in these villages. I learned that schools didn't have clean water. When we started, it was half the schools in the world. Now it's a third of the schools in the world. I'm sure there are many people in this room deeply passionate about education. Okay, but 1 out of every 3 schools has no clean water and no toilet. So this is a huge problem for girls. And there's tons of data that's come out now. Girls hit puberty, stay home 5 days a month, fall behind in their studies. There's already enormous social pressure against the girls in some of these countries to become educated. They drop out, and we see them walking with 40 pounds of dirty water on their back, often 4 or 5 hours a day. What I have really learned over the years is that this is an exclusively women's issue. It's about the women and the girls. I have now been to 69 countries. I've been to Ethiopia 30 times. I've never seen men get water. I don't care if I'm in Bangladesh, Cambodia, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Guatemala, Bolivia. It is the job and the role of the women and the girls to get the water. And we see women in the most undignified positions. These women here in a place called Gazi Springs, Ethiopia, they're trying to get to the eye of a spring, and all the black stuff is cow poop. They're literally ankle deep in cow feces as they're trying to get water with children on their back. This woman was digging in the sand, almost like an animal, in eastern Kenya, trying to find water in the sandy riverbed. And she told me through a translator, she said, well, there is another option, but people at that river nearby get killed by crocodiles. And she starts naming the women who went for water and were never seen. So I go and check that out. This is about a 3-minute walk from where she is. This is that source. The women had actually built that thing on the left as a tell for crocodiles. So if those branches start moving, they run back out. This is what it's like, 1/10 of the world, 1 out of every 10 people drinking water that puts their lives at risk every day. What's great about the issue, and what's been so fun, is that it is actually a solvable problem. I have a lot of friends who are working on cures for diseases that may exist 5 or 10 years in the future. They may be found in a lab or the bottom of a test tube. Water is not like that. There's not a single person on earth that we can't help today. You can't show me a person on the planet where our team would scratch our heads and say, oh, we just can't get water to that person. Now, there has not been the will to do this, for sure. There hasn't been the resources and the money allocated. A fraction of what is needed has gone towards clean water around the world. But we actually know how to do it. So Charity Water took a very pragmatic, solution-agnostic approach from the very beginning, and now we've funded 13 different technologies across 26 countries. So we said, whatever the appropriate technology is for that village, great, that's what we want to use, whether it's a rainwater harvesting system, whether it's a gravity-fed system, a sand filter, a pond sand filter, UV carbon, UF. It's often as simple as drilling a well for about $10,000 or $12,000. And it's a terrible irony, actually, to realize that you have people dying and they're living 25 stories on top of massive aquifers, the water that could save their lives and of their children. What they don't have access to is $1 million of drilling equipment, the rig, the trucks, the compressors. They don't have access to the hydrologists who can find the water and drill the wells. But when you're able to make all this happen, when you're able to bring the locals in, we're able to find water, it is the most extraordinary thing. I mean, I've been a part of maybe 50 or 60 of these celebrations now. And you see water shooting up from the ground as they flush the well, often thousands of people gathered around. This was actually at a school where 2,000 students go in the buildings behind there. This well was pumping 6 liters per second. It was an extraordinary amount of water, enough for the entire school. And often the kids will crash the drilling rig and their parents are trying to peel them off, and they're splashing, they're shouting, they're clapping, they're dancing. Sometimes these parties or celebrations will last a day, day and a half. We found, and I believe this today more than certainly when I started, that water it is the most transformative thing on the planet. I mean, it really has the power to change almost everything for a life, for a family, for a community. Think about what it means just in your own life. Like if you didn't have clean water, if you couldn't keep yourself clean, if you were getting sick, if you were holding a child in your arms dying of diarrhea. Water means better health, obviously. If your kids are drinking clean water, not water from swamps, they are healthier. It means better students, and there's tons of data now about how water and sanitation radically improves education around the world. And it gives time back to women, and that's what I love. I remember coming across this stat that 40 billion hours are wasted by women just in Africa collecting water. Somebody totaled it up. It's more than the entire global economy of France, more than every single person working. So you have this unrealized workforce, and we hear amazing stories of women that are starting small businesses with the extra time back. They're selling rice at the market. They're selling peanuts at the market. I was not too long ago in Zimbabwe and Zambia with women who were selling rugs for $4 that they were making. Some women tell us that we're just better mothers. We just have more time to spend with our families, less time, battling the elements, trying to get water from a faraway water hole. I think this is one of my favorite stories. Helen, this is one of the favorite Charity Water stories. It's from years ago, but she's a woman Helen Appio. This is a woman in northern Uganda. And we went into her village and we said, hey, Helen, you now have clean water. You're not walking anymore. How's your life different? And she says, now I am beautiful. And we're like, what do you mean you're beautiful? Of course, Helen, you're a beautiful Ugandan woman. She says, well, before I had to go a long distance and I was taking 2 jerry cans a day. So for us, just by the way, every time you see one of those yellow cans, 2 toilet flushes. So all day journey, 2 toilet flushes for us. She said, I was walking a far distance. I would take these 10 gallons of water back. And she said, I had a husband and 2 children, so I never had enough water. I had cooking to do. I had cleaning to do. They needed to drink. I needed to keep the kids' school uniforms clean. I needed to keep my husband's body clean and his clothes clean. So she said, I never used the water for myself. She said, now that I have clean water in my village, I can take all the water I want. And she says, now I am beautiful. She says, because I finally have enough water to wash my face and my body. And I feel beautiful for the first time. Hey, we'd never thought of that one before. I mean, water just having the simple power to restore dignity to a woman, to make her feel beautiful because she has enough water to wash and feel clean. What I think I most love about the issue is, especially now, it is the one thing everybody can agree on. I mean, I get to talk a lot and travel around, and I never come off stage and I'm told to stop it. People are not like, please stop that. Stop giving people clean water. They should be drinking from the swamps. You're harming humanity. This is harmful aid. It's brought together Republicans, independents, Democrats, people who are Muslims and Jews and atheists and Christians and Mormons. It's an amazing thing that people can agree on. If you don't have clean water, what have you got? And it's been cool to build a very, very big tent and involve a lot of different people. Okay, talk about the organization. So, startup story. So now we'll rewind. I'm 30, I come back from Mercy Ships. I'm completely broke because I never saved money as a nightclub promoter. If whatever we made, we would spend a little more. And then Mercy Ships actually charged me for 2 years. So I come back and I actually have nowhere to live. So my club partner takes me in and he says, you can live in there was a walk-in closet next to this room. So I wound up sleeping on the walk-in closet floor in Soho. And he said, you can use my living room as your office. So I'm like, great, free rent in Soho, New York. It doesn't matter that it's on a floor. So I just start. I'm running around telling people that I want to solve the water crisis, but I realize that there's this huge, bigger problem I need to solve because people don't trust charities. I had the advantage of coming from outside the charitable establishment. I had never worked at a charity before. I was talking to everyday people my age, 30 at the time, and I realized my friends were not giving to charities, and they had tons of excuses. Charities are black holes. I don't know where the money goes. Charities are badly run. Charities pay their CEOs millions and millions of dollars. Everybody seemed to have a scandal of a charity that they could pull out of their pocket as a reason for why they weren't giving. I learned there was real data behind this. Came across a USA Today poll that found 42% of Americans said they distrust charity. NYU did a study, found 70% of Americans said they believe charities waste money or badly waste money. 30% of the people polled thought charities did the right thing with their money. This surprises people, right? Because America has this amazing reputation, like who's more generous than Americans? The other thing that surprises people, of all American philanthropy, all the money that's given in this country, 4% goes overseas. 96% stays here. Our hospitals, our universities, our faith groups. So I realized that this was an opportunity, right? I didn't want to go steal donors from World Vision or Save the Children. I wanted to get these people to give, the people who weren't giving, and give them a completely new business model, something they could believe in. I wanted to completely reimagine, completely reinvent the way people thought of charity. I actually liked the word charity. Charity means love. It's charitas in the Latin. It means to help your neighbor in need. It's a virtue. I thought we need more of this in the world. This had become this tainted thing. And could we restore its true meaning by doing things very differently? So I had a couple ideas. Starting with a clean sheet of paper, not knowing any better, I thought, well, we got to solve the problem around money. So can we create a business model where 100% of any donation we ever take will directly go to fund water projects and give people clean water? And people are like, well, that's the stupidest thing we've ever heard. Like, you're living on a floor, bro. Like, how will you pay for like a salary someday or have an office or hire employees? I don't know. Like, but I bet this would get people to give. So I open up 2 bank accounts with a couple $100 each and say, public money we'll never touch, and somehow we're gonna make overhead cool. And we're gonna get people excited about building the organization. No idea what that would look like. That was idea number 1. Idea number 2, because money wasn't fungible, we would be able to easily prove where those donations went. We would never step on them. $6 came in, we could track it and say $6 went here. So I met the founder of Google Earth early on. I realized Google had given us this free place where we'd be able to geolocate every water project we ever did in the world. And we said, we are never gonna fund anything unless the public can go and see it. If we have 10,000 wells, then anyone in this room should be able to go to Best Buy, get a GPS device, or now use your phone, and go visit them all. We'll build the most hyper-transparent charity. Let's just make a big bet on radical and uncomfortable transparency from day one. Third thing was I wanted to build a beautiful brand. As I looked at charities, I saw the worst websites that I'd ever seen. By the way, this is 11 years ago. It has gotten so much better. I think we are now better programmatically in some ways than we are from marketing and branding. But at the beginning, like the bar was so low. I remember a charity had like animated blinking GIFs, and it's like founder kind of walked across the website and like in a suit and started delivering a message. I mean, I remember reading a New York Times article about the World Bank, and it looked at a big section of the World Bank's website, and the World Bank likes to put up a lot of PDFs, right? They found 70% of them had not one download. Right? So if that was the old way of communicating through white papers and statistics, the guilt and shame, that's the other thing I saw a lot of. You know, the leftovers from the Sally Struthers commercials and the kids with flies landing on their face in slow motion as they locked eyes with the camera and the 800 number came across the screen. Guilt and shame-based marketing. It actually works. And you'll see these ads today on Facebook. You will see the refugee kid with dirt on his face and sad eye and the name of the organization. But if I thought of the brands that I respected, that I admired, they did not market like that. For me, it would be as if Nike was running commercials telling America they were fat and ugly and lazy. Turn off the TV, go run a marathon, and buy our gear. That's not what Nike does. Nike tells stories of people overcoming adversity, unthinkable odds. They talk about the greatness within people. They built an aspirational brand with storytelling, and people want to rise to the opportunity and turn the TV off and go out and get fit. Apple for years wasn't even marketing using their products. They were marketing using inspirational people who were changing the norms, changing the way people thought. I'd come across this quote which really put a point on it for me. Nick Kristof wrote in the New York Times, he said, "Toothpaste is being peddled with far more sophistication than all of the world's life-saving causes." Right? Doritos can spend hundreds of millions of dollars marketing stuff that kills us and our children. And like the most important causes saving lives often had anemic brands. So I said, we're just gonna hire awesome designers, and we're gonna have good taste, and we're just gonna care about the way things look and the way that we present the brand into the world. So give away 100%, prove it, build a beautiful brand, and then the most important thing is what we wouldn't do. We wouldn't send anyone that looked like me anywhere to the developing world to dig or drill a well or build a rainwater system. Right? We had to work through the local partners. So our role could be raising awareness and money as efficiently as possible. But I truly believed for the work to be sustainable, it had to be 100% led by the locals. So our job would be to find them and grow the capacity of their organizations, help them hire more hydrologists, buy them trucks and drilling rigs, and help them move and get bigger offices if they need it. And success would look like going to a country where people didn't even know who we were. They knew who our local partner was. We would not be planting the charity water flag around the world. Our partners would be the ones who deserve the credit and would be getting the credit. So that was the model. It seems so kind of simple now, but no one was doing anything like this at the time. So day one, I had no better ideas except to throw myself a party in a nightclub to kick this all off. So I was turning 31, threw myself a birthday party in a club, got 700 people to come because I gave them open bar. And on the way in, I said, you all have to pay $20, and you got to put it in this big plexi bucket, and 100% is going to go to build some wells. So 700 people come. I remember, kid you not, a weed dealer walks in that night and puts $500 in, and he says, this is the first charitable gift I have ever made in my life, but I know where the money's going. I'm like, we're on to something. So we take the money, a couple weeks later, we drill a few wells, and we fix and rehabilitate a few wells in a refugee camp in northern Uganda where 31,000 people were registered, and there was one well. There should have been 120. We then send the proof, the photos, and the GPS back to the people who came and said, you did this. Your $20 did this. And people were blown away that they could see clean water flowing. They could actually see where $20 went, that a charity bothered to tell them what happened at some party. And we said, let's just do this on repeat. Let's build this feedback loop into everything that we do. And maybe we can create a virtuous cycle of generosity and giving and get people excited about giving more, not just to us, but to others. created a $20 bottle of water the next month and said, all right, well, people are buying dollar bottled water. Let's have them pay 20 and use all the money to help people. I designed a black label with cheery facts about death and disease and dying around the world. And we built these big exhibitions, and we put dirty water from the ponds and rivers in New York City in big plexi tanks. And we showed people what it would look like if they had to drink from New York City's disgusting water. And then we asked them to buy a $20 bottle. We didn't raise much, maybe $19,000. But it was seen by over 30,000 people that came through the exhibition and talked to us. We then started shooting rich people in New York in the same situations as the people we were seeing around the world, taking over galleries. What if your mom had to drink chocolate milk looking water? Or your kids going to a private school had to walk with 40 pounds of water on their back? Or my banker friends had to go to Central Park at noon, in their Brioni suits. We'd never allow this. Took over the space underneath Google headquarters. This exhibition was seen by 1 million people. I believe that if we had good creative, and it didn't always have to be so serious, we could have some fun every once in a while. If you had great creative, you could get donated space. And that turned out to be true. We wound up getting buses donated. We wound up getting taxi tops donated. We wound up getting TV spots donated, a TV spot that was seen by over 21 million people. Built a digital-only organization. I was never interested in direct mailing. The thought that I would buy your physical mailing address, send you a bunch of paper, and then ask you for a check in a self-addressed stamped envelope, that was not the future. So I invited myself to speak at Twitter headquarters when there were 28 employees. That turned out to be a strategic move. And we just built a digital-only organization. We would communicate to people on social media. We were the first charity to use Instagram, just wanting to build community, celebrate the diversity and the amazing things our supporters were doing around the world. Partnered with unlikely brands. We went to Saks Fifth Avenue in New York City, and we said, you guys are selling women $5,000 handbags. First of all, that is fantastic. How could you even do that? Good for you. We have some really cheap $5,000 water projects. What if we partnered? We're both in New York, like $5,000, great price point. Anyway, I think they had never heard anything so crazy as like luxury and water in Africa. So they gave us the windows for a week in Fifth Avenue. Then they gave us their Chicago and Beverly Hills windows. They got their employees involved. They got their customers involved. They started calling Chanel, Gucci, Prada, selling them water projects. Raised $700,000. They let me build a well in Saks. Raised $700,000 as a company, our first corporate partnership. You heard from Michelle last night. Michelle's been a great partner of Charity Waters for many, many years now. This really kicked off the ability to work with like-minded partners and go farther together. We went to American Express, talked to them about the issue, and they launched a big print campaign. They actually put us on their homepage for 3 months. So my friends would go to pay their bills, and they're like, Charity Water is on Amex's site. The awareness we got from these campaigns. We then asked the NASDAQ and the stock exchange, hey, if anybody ever kind of blows it at the end, can we be your backup? We have now opened up the NASDAQ 3 times and the New York Stock Exchange, I think 4 times. Just eyeballs, just awareness, just a way to get the brand out there just by asking. So then, first couple years were great. We raised a few $1 million, and some of you might be saying, well, what about that 100% model? So about 2 years in, we ran out of money. So some pretty good advice. Please don't run out of money in your nonprofit. If you do, I would say don't compromise. So we had this moment where we had $881,000 in the water bank account that I couldn't touch, and we had about $111. At one point, it was 111. We got a little more. We were basically weeks from insolvency. And I wasn't cashing my paycheck. I was telling our few employees at the time not to cash theirs. And the advice I was getting from friends was to go and borrow against the 8 months of cash flow. And I'm like, if we touch 1 penny, we will have compromised our integrity. There'll be a crack at the foundation. We might as well all resign in shame. So I was going to shut the charity down. I was going to send $880,000 out, build as many water projects as possible, and cry business model failure and just say 100% model only works for really rich people. I was praying like crazy for a miracle. I have to admit I had little to zero faith that anything would happen. And right before we were about to shut down, a complete stranger walks in the office, sits with me, spends 2 hours, and he was a British atheist. I remember he told me he was an atheist. And it was very British and kind of cynical. And he said, I don't give to charity. I don't trust charity. I'm like, I'm building this thing for people like you. So I told him about the business model. I told him where we were and our struggles on the other side. And he says, well, let me think about what you're doing. 2 days later, it's midnight, I'm up, I'm working on my laptop, I'm stressed out, and I get this email from him. He says, hey, the wire should have gone through for $1 million. Dude wired $1 million into our overhead account. Remember, I didn't believe it. I logged on to the bank, and there it was, 1,000,000,000. We had another year of oxygen. I secretly did 5 wells for him, his wife, and his 3 kids, and then I invited him to Ethiopia. This was his welcome at his 9-year-old daughter's well in Ethiopia as the whole community came out. So he got to see a little bit of that impact as well. That then gave us the oxygen to actually work on the other side of the business model. And I started going to other entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley saying, hey, will you pay for our staff? We concepted a 3-year giving program called The Well that was multi-year, multi-tier. And we just started going to the people that were running Facebook and running Twitter and running Uber and Spotify. And I went to these entrepreneurs and said, I'm trying to build a startup. Will you help me pay for my software engineers, my UI designers, my water hydrologists, my accountants? And we built, over time, a community of now 129 people from technology, from sports and entertainment. It's a diverse group. We have Depeche Mode paying our overhead. We have Tony Hawk paying our overhead. We have Matt Hasselbeck paying our overhead. It's a really cool group of people. And that's how we've been able to do it. That then led us into this idea that Jeff mentioned of asking people to donate their birthday. So my 32nd birthday, I said, I'm done with the nightclub. It was great to get us started, but it doesn't scale. Right? Maybe I could charge a little more. Maybe I could get a few more people in. But what if I gave up my birthday and asked everyone for $32? Everyone I knew had $32, especially if 100% was going to the projects. So I raised $59,000 just emailing everyone I know, and it just spreads and spreads and spreads. The 7-year-old kid in Austin, Texas says, I'll donate my 7th. He starts knocking on doors in Austin, raises $22,000. I'm not gonna lie, okay? He lived in a nice neighborhood. There were like some 77s, some 777s. So this idea takes off. Jack Dorsey from Twitter does 3 birthdays, raises almost $200,000. Daniel Ek from Spotify donates his birthday. Angela Ahrens, who sits over all retail at Apple, raises $100,000 with her birthday. Spreads to Hollywood. These guys give up their birthday. They then ask their fans to give up birthdays. They raise a couple $100,000. Will says, well, we want to come with you to actually see the impact. So they come with me to Ethiopia for a week to see the impact that their birthdays made. So all that was very cool, but I kid you not, the heart of the movement was 6-year-olds in New York City that were neither rich nor famous, 16-year-olds in the middle of the country. One of my favorite, 89-year-old Nona Ween. And her mission statement is beautiful. I'm turning 89. I'd like to make that possible for more people. She's lived double the life expectancy. Many of these places where we work simply because of the privilege that she was born into, the healthcare system she was born into. And if her birthday could help people have more birthdays, that's what she wanted to do. Some of you guys know this story. Rachel Beckwith, a little girl in Seattle, heard me speak at her church, she raised $220, and after her birthday, she was killed in a car crash. And the world learned of this 9-year-old girl who wanted $9 for her birthday. And over 30,000 people gave $1.3 million. People in Africa started donating $9 for Rachel's campaign. She's now helped over 100,000 people get clean water because so many of her donors then gave up their own birthdays and they raised another $3 million. So this movement of birthdays really just began to grow, tens of thousands of people all around the world. And what we learned from this was, we learned this early on, but we started getting the words for it. Charity Water was not our story, right? So many organizations position themselves as the hero. Some of you guys may know Don Miller's stuff from StoryBrand. We are not the hero. This is their story. This is the story of our donors, of our birthday fundraisers, of our volunteers, of our local partners out there crushing it, of the beneficiaries who are partnering to make their community stronger. We're the guide. Our role is the guide. We want to connect people who want to make a difference to those who can actually deliver that in the most efficient way. We focused on radical transparency. We did cool things like putting GPS trackers on our drilling rigs and building maps so you can actually see where our drilling rigs are at any time. We gave them Twitter accounts. So we trained our drillers to tweet their location now of the drilling rig. As we started scaling across 25 countries, we wanted to tackle sustainability. So we went to Google and said, we have this crazy idea. We know where all of our wells are. We know that they were all working on day one, but we don't know 5 years later. So could we please have $5 million? And we think we can build a sensor where we could retrofit our wells and we'd know not only how many were working, but how much water was flowing. So Google actually awarded us a $5 million grant. We worked with 20 labs over 2 years. We open sourced our first remote sensor. We installed 3,000 in the pilot. And the minute we did that, we got the largest data set of rural water supply in the history of the world, over 1 billion liters that we're now tracking. We're now able to show Rachel's family, pick out one of her birthday wells from this region, not only show her the satellite images and exactly how much it cost, but now we can show her 5 years later exactly how much water is flowing every single day. We can zoom in on a single day and say, hey, last Thursday, women started getting up at 4:02 a.m. to get clean water. And throughout the course of that day, they would have filled up 1,579 liter bottles. I just think of that for a second. If we went to the deli and bought it, that's $3,000 of water every day times 365 times 5 years. That one's actually 6 years old. In 11 years, a lot of this stuff had worked. If I had more time, I would tell you more. It's contributed now to over $300 million that's been raised. And that's not thanks to me. It's not thanks to our staff. It's thanks to 1 million people around the world who have shaken off the apathy that would be probably pretty easy. The water crisis, how does it affect me? And they've actually decided to do something, to contribute money, to contribute their birthday. That's allowed us to bring clean water to 28,000 villages now across the world for 8.2 million people. And what I'm so proud of now is that we also employ 800 locals out there every single day that are out there doing it. We only have 80 people in New York City and 800 people around the world that are the ones actually making it happen. As I kind of think back on the journey, a couple reflections. Dr. Gary, believe it or not, 11 years later is still at it. He is in year 36 on this ship. His daughter wants to intern for me. That's his whole cycle. She's now in college. I went to the first well for my 31st birthday party recently, and this is a picture of it. It was still working. We reckon it has been pumped 50 million times. It's done 10 million liters over that decade. The IDP camp is actually now a trickle. It's only about 500 people living there as they've been resettled. But it's still working 11 years later. And if I think about, this guy who was out, raging, I've been very blessed. When I walked away from that stuff, I walked away from it for good. I never had another cigarette, never touched drugs, never looked at porn again. I just walked away from that entire life. And I've been blessed with an amazing family, an amazing wife who I got to work with for 9 years as our creative director, 2 kids. We live in New York City, and I can walk to work in 7 minutes, which is great with all the travel. And I want to really just end with John Bosco, which is what keeps me going. The individual stories, really, it's easy to get lost in the numbers, but John Bosco, when we first met him, drinking this unthinkable water, and then drilling rigs start moving towards his village because somebody cares, somebody hears the story, somebody wants to contribute. And he watches local Rwandans jump out and start finding water. Imagine, they must have been heroes for this kid. They find water, and less than a week later, he is drinking clean water for the first time in his life. Now, it's cool. We got to go back 8 years later, and we found our boy, John Bosco, the kid, is now no longer a kid. He's a man. He's all grown up. In that time, he's gotten married, and he's had his own daughter. So this is Jean-Marie. We realized she's never had to drink from that swamp. The cycle of poverty was broken 8 years ago, which is also why it's so important. The sustainability of these projects, it's so important that they continue to function and serve people over time. But this is what it's all about for us, knowing that we've been able to do that in 20,000 different communities. Keeps us going. So as we look forward, 8.2 million, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. I did some math. It's 17 times the population of Atlanta, and you guys have probably been to this stadium. I hear soccer's, you guys are crushing it at soccer here. It's 122 times the stadium. I was at Madison Square Garden with my wife recently for a concert. I'm like, honey, look around. Like, it's 400 Madison Square Gardens. That's what 8 million people is. However, it is only 1/80th, or 1.2% of the global problem. We've done very little, really. I mean, we're at the very beginning of the journey. One of the questions I get asked is like, did you ever think you'd be so successful with Charity Water? Did you ever think you'd raise so much money? The real answer is, I thought we would be infinitely more successful. By orders of magnitude, not 10x, like 30x. It's water, it's 100%. It's really our ineptitude to just figure out how to crack the code. So I really think the best is yet to come. A couple ways that people can engage with us. If you aren't a supporter, if you're interested in getting involved in the cause, the first is a spring, and I just want to give you a little bit of the business case for this. But it's a brand new community that we started curating really out of response to our first down year. So this is what the growth curve looked like for Charity Water. 8 years of growth. Our 8th year, we did $43 million. And then we had our first down year, and it felt terrible. The market went sideways. We had 2 huge donors lay off employees in their company. 1 stock tanked, and we lost $8 million of donations from 2 people. And I had an existential crisis as a founder. I tried to start a CEO search and say, I'm not the guy anymore. It felt awful. We helped less people than we had the year before. We'd only known growth. I wound up taking a month off and coming back and actually saying, well, it's our 10th year. Let's see if we can solve the problem. And as I was looking at the Netflix models and the Spotifys and knowing some of these people, we said, well, what if instead of the birthdays, which are great, but it's just once, people were just doing 1 birthday, what if we could get a community of people to show up month in and month out for clean water, knowing that 100% goes? So we built that program, and it's called The Spring, and it started spreading. We anchored it around $30 a month. It cost us exactly $30 to get 1 person clean water on average across the portfolio. $30 to get 1 person clean water. And The Spring, as of yesterday, just added its 100th country. We have people in Belarus, we have people in Ghana who are giving $30 a month. Some are giving less. We have college students giving 10. We have people giving 100. But this has led to the next wave of growth. Last year, we were able to grow 37%. This year, we're up 30%. This year, we are helping 3,800 people get clean water every single day. It's 150 an hour. So the time that I was up here, 150 people got clean water. And it's really thanks to the Spring in this community. So we have a lot of Spring members in Atlanta. We actually have kind of a link that's been able to track the impact of the Atlanta community. So if you'd like to know more about that, yeah, take a picture. It's just charitywater.org/Atlanta. If you have Apple Pay, you can sign up in 5 seconds, just with your thumb. We made it very easy. We did the pilot with Apple Pay. Second, so charitywater.org/Atlanta. The second thing, I wrote a book. And there's a lot more in it. I spent the last 18 months kind of trying to put the story down. A lot of the stuff I didn't get the stand. Yeah, it was a terrible process. Those were writers. Hated the process. But at the end, I'm really, really proud of what we got. Thirst comes out in a couple months. It's not my picture on the cover. I gave away the advance. I gave away 100% of the proceeds, so I won't make a penny on the book. And we actually had a donor read it. And he was so inspired that he put up $300,000 to be unlocked with every pre-order. So he said, anyone that pre-orders your book, I'll pay $30 in their name to give 1 person clean water. So you just have to forward your receipts, and you can help us get $30 to give 1 person clean water. So if you want to know a little more, there's a bunch of stuff that I didn't get a chance to talk about. But you can go buy the book. It doesn't help me. It helps spread the story, and it would help 1 person get clean water. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Leave it there. My favorite quote in 11 years is this thing. Somebody sent me this picture walking by a bodega in New York City. It's from an old rabbinic text, and it says, do not be afraid of work that has no end. I love this. I love this. What it means for me is that if your work is truly to end the needless suffering, if your work is in service of humanity, if in selflessness, if it's helping others, it will never end. When we solve the water crisis, and I'm saying when, not if, we are not going to drop the mic and go become bankers. No offense to bankers, But we're going to take everything we've learned, we're going to take our whole community, and we would focus on another problem. Maybe a justice issue, maybe hunger, maybe shelter. It's okay. This pursuit of others, this pursuit of selflessness, it has no end. And it's one of the most freeing things for me to just realize that. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you guys so much for so much of your time. It's been great being here.